Welcome, brave souls, to the chilling depths of horror and detail, the realm where the shadows whisper ancient secrets and nightmares come to life. I am your guide through the darkness, and on this channel, we delve into the spine-chilling world of Wendigo horror stories that will send shivers down your spine. First story. The Wendigo. Blinded, Martin stumbled through the snow. The Wendigo followed close behind, toying with him. It had just finished devouring the last member of his camp, but was still ravenous for more flesh. They had been without food for nearly a week, maybe more. The cold and hunger made it impossible to be sure. The night before it had taken James. He was the most fragile of the group. Hunger had attacked his will with animalistic ferocity. The native members of the group had fled that evening, disappearing into the white. Evidently, they had sensed this coming. James had been an anxiety-ridden, whiny little pissant for the few days prior, but that evening, as they lit the fire, he had changed. He grew quiet, a wild, vacant stare overtaking his gaunt face. The rest of them just thought him fully spent. Hindsight would mark this as the moment the Wendigo took him. Deep in the bowels of the night, the camp awoke to nerve-rending screams. It was the call of a man being torn apart by the jaws of predators. Some of them had heard it before during bear or wolf attacks. It was coming from George's tent. As they approached, guns drawn, they saw something flee into the night. They found George with his leg devoured up to his hip, dying rapidly of blood loss. He managed to sputter out the words, "James, Wendigo," before he expired. None of them thought James could have done this, but they ran to his tent anyway. They found him, crouched apishly, his face, chest, and hands covered in gore. He was gnawing on what appeared to be a human bone. He fixed them with that same wildly vacant stare from earlier, then rose up to full height, ripping the tent away with one hand. He stood a foot taller and wider than he had before. His face looked even more skeletal. He let out a piercing, preternatural cry that staggered back the already horrified men. Then he flew forward and attacked. Guns went off, but they either missed or had no effect. He grabbed Henry by the shoulders and bit into his face. The other two men scattered. They both heard the screams and the wet cracking sounds from where they hid. Martin knew there was no hope in running. He rechambered his rifle and prepared for a final stand. He watched in terror as James reappeared in his line of sight, now more than double his previous size. He gathered his nerve, stood tall, and aimed his shot. Just then, he heard Robert's shotgun fire from the other side of the monster. His eyes went black. He dropped the gun and stumbled away into the night. He heard the screams as Robert was torn apart and eaten. Now, stumbling desperately through the snow, he awaited death. He slowed to a stop as he heard a low growl. Hot breath caressed the back of his neck. The knocking continues, the same sharp rhythmic pace. The lock is the only thing keeping them out. The cabin belonged to Sam's great-grandfather and hadn't been used in years. We were miles from civilization and anyone that could help. It started the moment we pulled up. I felt a sense of dread filling my chest as I stared at the cabin bathed in shadows from the trees that surrounded it. I pushed the feeling aside, chalking it up to being so far from everything and everyone. But the feeling didn't disappear. If anything, it got stronger. It was Sam who found it. He'd been looking for fishing gear in the cellar. Instead, he found the jar, stuffed with a folded piece of paper and what looked like a twig. He dumped the contents onto the floor, holding the twig in between his fingers. "It's a bone," he'd said, dropping it into the jar with a clink. "A bone?" Cora asked, crinkling her nose. "A small animal bone, maybe," Sam said. He'd shook the dust from the paper, silently reading. "What's it say?" Matt asked. "Just gibberish," he said, attempting to shove it back in the jar. Cora snatched it, staring at the shaky print. Matt read it out loud over her shoulder. "My wife is not my wife. She ate our dog, crunching his bones in her jaws. She's out there now, still knocking to be let in." There were brown streaks on the paper. Sam put the jar back in the cellar. But the damage, whatever that was, had been done. We'd all felt it, some sort of ominous countdown. Matt was the first to go. At midnight he jumped up, mumbling something about his dog, and ran out into the woods. We tried to explain that he didn't have a dog, but he ran and ran until the darkness swallowed him up. Cora chased after him, screaming his name. Sam left an hour later, swearing he'd heard his little brother calling him. Seth's been dead 6 years. Sam pushed me when I tried to stop him. I called after him, but he kept running. So I locked the door, sitting on the floor with my back against it. I'd get help in the morning, I reasoned. Then the knocking started.
"Let me in,"
Matt said, but his voice was wrong, like he had a mouthful of gravel. I ignored the knocking, and after a while he left. But the knocking continued. "Kaylee," Cora said. I could almost hear her smiling. I stayed quiet, and like Matt, she left, eventually. Sam began knocking a few moments ago. "I'm coming in," he said, his voice like water bubbling in a drain, broken fingernails scratching at the wood. "I have a few hours until morning, but I know I won't make it, because I can hear whatever that thing is behind the door chuckling and an unmistakable jingling sound. That's when I remember that Sam has the keys. Third story. First encounter. Hello again. As I have seen some of you wanted to hear the stories I have to tell, I have on to many to post in just one paragraph, so I'll chop them up and let you guys decide whether or not you want more. I live in a small town in northeastern Pennsylvania that is surrounded by farms and endless forests. As a kid, I spent most of my time fishing for trout or building stick forts. Now I have bonfires and deer hunt. So as you can imagine, I am outside most of the time. At this point, I know almost every paw print or call of the local animals, and I can identify it almost immediately. At the age of 13, I went over to one of my friend's houses for his birthday party, mid-June, alongside another 2 guys. We used to hang out a lot, but after this incident things happened, and we broke apart and went our own ways. Anyways, we were crazy and imaging, exploring abandoned places, and finding paranormal spirits as all the YouTubers did at the time. About 3 miles into the forest, there was an abandoned quarry. All of us were excited to explore it, so we got the birthday boy, his name is Aiden, to lie to his dad and say we're going for a walk through the woods. Aiden's dad said yes, but to not wander off too far, and to pay attention to the trees due to the number of mountain lion sightings in the area recently. Many say they don't live here in Pennsylvania, said to be a boogeyman of sorts, but Eve's seen one with my own eyes, and I can tell you they're here, along with wolves. We geared up and grabbed our phones and knives. Well, at the time I didn't have a knife, but I borrowed one from one of the bigger guys. His name was Clayton, and he is a little out of shape, putting it nicely. He usually brought up to 10 knives to our parties like some sort of serial killer. Sometimes he made me worry. He also gave one to our 4th guy, named Marcellus. More ghetto than country boy, but it's okay, we got along at the time. As we packed our bags and got ready, we poked fun at each other. Me insulting Aiden's choice of footwear, wearing a pair of black and white Vans, while the rest of us wore boots. Clayton poking fun at me for being the smallest guy in the group, and Marcellus backing up Clayton's insults. As we headed out the door, excited for what we were going to find in the amazing abandoned quarry, imagining old mine shafts deep in the ground where coal was mined or copper, the air seemed to change. Change as is heavier, like when a kid in class threatens to kill everyone in the room. Yeah, that kind of heavy, almost a primitive fear. As I eerily looked around curious about what installed this primitive fear into my system, the others talked about what we were going to find. I think we are going to find some coal. Maybe we can sell it to some local farmer, commented Clayton, in an almost wishful sort of way. It's a quarry, dumb asterisk, not a mine shaft, yelled Aiden, furious with Clayton's idiotic comment. Aiden had a tendency to get angry over the stupidest of mistakes. Even a misspoken word was enough to set him off. Same thing. Mineshaft, quarry. Your mom's asterisk SS. All things worth exploring. Clayton said in a mocking tone. Shut the F asterisk CK up before I rock your world, fat asteriskus. Aiden yelled in rage, almost about to throw a fist and knock his teeth out. As Marcellus calmed both of the down, I zoned out, as we were walking into the woods now after going through on long field. The feeling of dread was getting stronger, and I almost wanted to run. I knew I was being watched. I always know. When someone stares at me in class, I usually look directly at them when I notice the feeling. I started to scan my surroundings. Maple trees, rocks, cliffs, bones, birds, beehives. Wait, bones? I backtracked to where I seen bones and looked a little closer. About 60 yards away at the bottom of a cliff was a dead deer, fresh, blood still on its bones, flesh hanging from its skull. I imagined the thing that could have mutilated it so badly and thought of a 1,000-pound black bear with rabies. Honestly, now I wish it was just a bear. Hey Dib, stick I talking to you. Clayton pegged me with a rock and broke my trance. What? What do you want, man? I said, clearly annoyed. I said, what the hell are you looking at? Clayton barked, irritated that I didn't respond sooner. Nothing. Come on, let's get going. Still another 2.5 miles till we reach the quarry. Nothing exactly exciting happened as we climbed a large hill. I felt the air get heavier and my primal fear clawing its way up my spine as if it's about to dig itself out. Once we reached the top of the hill, there was a level part, still filled with maple and birch trees and some decent-sized rocks. There was a barbed wire fence that led to a clearing, freshly mowed like a field. Aiden commented saying that was his property and his neighbor probably was trespassing again. As we got to the fence, I noticed something red hanging from the fence. A rag or piece of clothing covered in dried blood. And underneath it was a rusted, old knife, with a saw blade on one side and a sharp edge on other. Me and Marcellus argued for a minute about who got the knife, and I gave in and let him have it. We crawled under the fence and walked through the field. Right now we were only about half a mile away from the quarry. I zoned out again as we walked. No one was talking about anything exciting anyway, and I scanned my surroundings when my fear jumped, almost right out of me. I couldn't place it as I frantically looked around. Something bad, no, something evil was near me and I could sense it. I was at the back of the line, so no one noticed my panic. I went tree to tree scanning for something out of place. And when I got to a birch tree roughly 25 yards away, I saw it. There was a large, lengthy, gray hand wrapped around the tree. I could almost make out claws. The eye looked up above the hand, and I could just barely see the edge of a head. I looked at my friends who got a little bit ahead of me, looked back at the tree, and the gray thing was gone. I ran to catch up with my friends, deciding to keep what I just saw quiet so I'm not made fun of for the rest of the weekend. We finally started to see a clearing up ahead, with another barbed wire fence. We walked through a patch of thorn bushes about as tall as me, and it shredded our bare torsos as we took off our shirts and hung them from our shoulders. We crouched under the fence and made it to the quarry. Now, almost 50 years later, it was just some old cow pasture. We were a little bummed out as we were hoping for the ultimate mine shaft experience, but we knew logically what we would find. There was this cool little part where the rock was cut out, leaving a 10-foot drop below to the cow pasture. We went over there and screwed around on the cliff. It was roughly 100 yards away from the tree line, so we were a little far from the woods. There was a pallet with some perfect cut square rocks in it, and we looked through them fascinated by how precise they were. But in the end, we just left them. Aiden got the idea to take some Instagram pictures, and as we got into position to take photos for our pages, we all spun around towards the woods hearing his dad, but it was off, almost mechanical, startled by how quiet it was. Almost a whisper, but the woods was 100 yards away. My fear crawled its way into me, and I wanted to go home knowing something was wrong. Guys, we need to go, I stated, walking towards the tree line. The others followed. My fear grew stronger and stronger. I scanned the field, then the cliff, then the trees. As I was walking, we were at the tree line, scrambling under the fence. Snap! A branch cracked not too far from us. We all looked. Marcellus still under the fence, and we saw it. 20 yards away was this 9-foot human-like animal. No, not animal. It stood on 2 legs like a human. Its gray skinny arms ended at its knees, and its claws were as big as its hands. It was partially crouched, perching its elbows on its knees, staring at us with its hot, red eyes. Teeth stuck out of its mouth like a piranha with large canines like a dog. Its teeth were an ugly yellow and blackish color, with some blood stains on its top row. We all stood, frozen and staring at this beast. Then its eyes snapped to mine. It made eye contact and twitched. In fear, I let out a gasp. Its eyes perked up as it heard this, as if in pleasure. It slowly stood up, breaking my trance, and I jumped into flight mode. Run! I screamed, making a dash for home. The field only 50 yards away. The creature let out an almost metallic, human, bear-like roar. Its scream filled me with fear, and I could sense the hate in its veins. This monster was primal fear. We ran like hell as it chased after us, dodging left and right, changing direction, tripping it up so it can't catch us. We dove under the barbed wire fence and kept running. I looked back to see it hurdle the fence like it was nothing, hot on our heels, running on all fours. I tripped over a branch and rolled, catching myself, and kept running, but this put me at the back of the line. I felt its hot breath on my back as it ran. It let out another scream, and I jumped off the Narrabee cliff to my right. My friends did the same. It was only a 15-foot drop onto some dead leaves and grass, so we landed somewhat nicely, except I rolled my ankle in the process and Aiden landed his knee on a rock. I looked back and seen I almost landed on the deer corpse from earlier, and that gave me a spark of renewed energy. The tree line was only 300 yards away, and we ran like hell. We heard it screeching and scrambling down the hill at full speed. We vaulted over rocks and slid under fallen trees, and this thing was right on us the whole time, teeth bared and roaring in hatred. I knew the only goal this abomination had was to mutilate us like the deer. We ran and ran. Then it roared again, this time, sounding almost in defeat. We cleared the tree line and ran to the road. We turned back around to see where it was, and it stood in the tree line, almost out of view, but still visible enough to see it. Evan, it croaked, in a voice so unnatural and satanic, almost like the demons in movies, but more metallic. I didn't mention this before, but my name is Evan. My friends always call each other mean things, so we rarely said our real names. Instead of primal fear, this time I felt primal rage. I puffed out my chest and slammed my hands on my pecs. I screamed, a little unsettled by my primal outburst. This thing simply smiled, turned around, and walked away. We all looked at each other and went back to the house. Aiden's dad didn't hear the screams, so we had to explain nothing. We went and hid in his room in silence. None of us really talked about it much except for me. If I was to ask them now about it, they would probably say it was just a bear and that we overreacted. But I'm telling you now, there was more to come to prove suspicions, at least to me. So that was part 1. Leave a comment if you want to hear more stories. 4th story. My wife and I found a door in the middle of the woods. What the hell? What is it, honey? My wife's voice called out from behind me. It's a door. She laughed. Did you break into the pot stash early? We're in the middle of the woods. Why would there be a— Oh, huh. Karen stopped as she saw it, and we stood shoulder to shoulder looking at it. An old wooden door built into the side of a hill in the middle of nowhere. It really is crazy what you can find out on these expeditions sometimes. Huh, honey? She grinned. Should we knock? I shook my head. I'm not really sure I want to meet the kind of person that lives inside a hill. Oh, come on. Karen punched my shoulder. Where's your sense of adventure? Karen strode up to the door and gave it a polite knock. Hello. I'm looking for a Mr. Beard. A Mr. Treebeard? I chuckled as I shook my head. Karen never let me forget the little wonderful things about her that made me fall in love with her. She turned to me in mock disappointment. I don't think anybody's home, honey. She said. All right, come on. I said. We've got enough shrooms for now. Let's find a good place to trip. Are you kidding? God. I married the most boring man in the universe. We've got to go inside. What if someone lives there? What if somebody lives in a hill in the woods? I think the man who built his house underground in a forest will be understanding if we offer to share some of our pot with him. You assume that just because he lives in a hill he smokes pot? I don't know, Karen. That's pretty racist. Racist? Against who? Tree people, obviously. Who else? Karen laughed and punched me in the shoulder again. I feigned being hurt, even though I loved it when she did that. All right, I finally agreed. After all, if I didn't completely ignore common sense sometimes, I wouldn't be married to you in the first place. You're really funny. After I kick you out of the house, maybe you can live with Mr. Treebeard out here in the woods. I chuckled and tried the knob. The door was unlocked. As we pushed it open, we were greeted by a damp, mossy smell. The room inside was pitch black, but it seemed to be made entirely of rock, not dirt like I had expected. Hold on a second, I said, sliding the pack off onto the ground and fumbling around inside for the flashlight. I flipped it on and scanned the walls. What the? The walls were all covered in some sort of nonsensical carvings. It reminded me of when we'd studied Egyptian hieroglyphics in school. What is this, wingdings? Karen joked. I didn't answer. I had gotten the sudden feeling that I was being watched. I swung the flashlight to the back wall, only to discover that there wasn't one. The passage continued on and sloped downwards until the flashlight beam ended on the ceiling about 30 feet away. Karen, I think we should dash. Hold on. What's that? Karen pointed to a dark spot on the floor, and I pointed the flashlight down to illuminate it. It was some kind of black liquid. Motor oil? I joked. But Karen's wasn't joking around. She knelt down to look at the puddle. It's blood, Danny, she said. And look, it's leading down inside. I tilted the flashlight up. She was right. There was a blood trail leading deeper into the cavern. It's probably just an animal, I said. We should go. But Karen was already tying her hair up the way she did at work. She cupped her hands to her mouth. Hello, she called out. I heard the call echo down the chamber, which must have been much larger than we had originally thought. Is anybody down there? Silence. But then, a barely audible call answered. Help. The call sounded like it was coming from deep within the cavern. When I heard it, all the hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and there was a sinking feeling in my chest. My every instinct started telling me to get the fuck out of this place. Karen, it could be some sort of trap, I said. Let's call the park rangers and then get the fuck out of here. Somebody's hurt down there, Danny, she said sternly. But then her expression softened a bit. Sorry, honey. This is what you got yourself into when you decided to marry a nurse. I sighed. I knew there was no stopping Karen once she had set her mind to do something, but I kept a tight grip on the heavy mag flashlight as we proceeded down the passageway. The blood trail got thinner as we walked deeper into the cavern. Whoever it was must have lost most of their blood in the antechamber. But if they were hurt out there, why had they retreated further into the cavern? Why not go outside where they had a chance of being found? It didn't make any sense. The air grew hotter and more humid as we went further down the increasingly steep slope, and a pungent smell of mold invaded our nostrils. I coughed as I breathed the horrid air. Where did all this dust come from? The deeper sections of the cavern walls had been cracked open by tree roots that had burrowed their way through the stone. What the fuck is this place? I whispered to Karen. Maybe some sort of makeshift survival bunker? She guessed. She cupped her hands to her mouth again. Hello-o. Her shout echoed down the hallway. If you can hear us, stay calm. We're going to help you get out to safety. Help. The voice was a little louder this time. We must be getting closer, I thought. But the sense of revulsion I felt on hearing the voice only got worse. Did she not feel it? As we went deeper inside, we found where the blood trail ended. There was a long smear of it on the ground. It looked like somebody had been dragged across the floor while bleeding heavily. And then it just stopped. Not even a drop after that. The walls of the cavern had now been almost completely overrun by roots, and breathing was getting difficult as the air had grown hotter and more choked with dust. Help. The voice was very close now, and I could now make it out more clearly. It sounded strange, all breathy and raspy, like a crude imitation of what a person should sound like. The floor had now become so steep it was impossible to go any further without risking a fall into God knows. We've got to get down to him somehow. Karen wheezed out. She must have been having even more trouble breathing in the hot, thick dust than me. I've got it, I said. You step back. I pulled out the length of rope we'd brought in our emergency gear and tied it to one of the thick roots springing through the walls of the cave. I gave it a few firm tugs to make sure it was secure before tying the other end around my waist. I'd never wanted to turn around and go home so badly, but I knew there was no way Karen would leave without seeing this through. I started the climb down carefully, leaning over and moving the flashlight around to try to see what was going on without slipping and falling. I could see the vague outline of a man in the darkness, and I swung the flashlight beam over him. My blood went cold. Karen, run.
What?
Run. My breath was knocked out as the rope yanked back against my waist. I hoped it was Karen pulling, but I knew it wasn't. She wasn't that strong. I landed on the ground hard, and the rope continued to pull me backwards. Danny, what the fuck is Dash? Run, goddammit. She started to back away as the roots on the walls all started to move, slowly snaking their way towards us. I sawed through the rope with my pocket knife and stumbled forward into a sprint, yanking Karen along with me. She wouldn't have hesitated if she'd seen what I had. At the bottom of the cavern, a man had been suspended above the ground in a giant web of roots that were writhing and sliding through him. Little bulges were moving slowly up the roots that led away from his collapsed and shriveled body, one root jutting into his throat and twisting around every time he called for help. The plant was working his voice box like a puppet. We abandoned our flashlight and gear bag in the cave behind us as we sprinted towards the exit in total darkness, hacking and coughing as the moldy, dusty air of the cavern filled our lungs. I could feel myself tripping on roots that had not been there on the way in. I felt a yank on my hand as Karen fell, and we both tumbled down onto the writhing roots which circled around our limbs and began to drag us backwards. I started hacking desperately at them with my pocket knife. The roots recoiled as I struck them, and I managed to free my legs. I pulled at Karen's hands, but the roots were stronger. "Just leave me," she shouted at me. "Fuck no." I swung blindly at her legs, and the knife connected with a sick thud. I swung a dozen more times, slashing her legs once by mistake before she was loose enough to yank free. We kept running towards the door, and I could feel the air getting cooler and fresher, and the floor beginning to level out. We'd almost made it. I could see the outline of light around the door now. We ran full force into it, ricocheting off and bouncing back onto the ground. I scrambled up. "Please be open." I grabbed the knob and yanked, and a torrent of fresh air and sunlight poured into the cavern. I grabbed Karen's arm and half-dragged her through open door before collapsing exhausted on the ground. "We made it," I gasped out. My chest was heaving up and down as I lay on my back, coughing up all the dust from the cavern air. "Yeah." Karen was bright red with exhaustion, her arms and legs covered in scratch marks. I don't imagine I looked much better. "What the fuck was that?" I said breathlessly, getting to my feet. Karen shook her head. "I don't know, but let's get the fuck out of here." I helped Karen to her feet, and we both stood there panting and coughing with our hands on our knees. Karen coughed something up into her hand. "Danny," she said, showing it to me. It was a small leaf. I watched her face as little green tendrils began to spread out and coil around under her skin, and I realized with horror that it hadn't been dust we were breathing in. It had been spores. Fifth story. Georgia Wendigo encounter. Growing up in the mountains of North Georgia, camping and hiking were things me and my brother did so often it was second nature. So anytime Ryan and I had a break from school, we would head straight for the woods. We packed our gear, let our parents know where we were going, and that was that. No questions asked. We decided to camp about midways through Jack's River Trail in the Cohutta Wilderness, and it's a trail we knew fairly well as we had used to a few times before to practice long hikes. We arrived at the trailhead around lunchtime, parked the car, got our gear out, and headed into the woods. We passed a few hikers as moved along and asked them how the trail looked, and the answer was always the same: wet. Jack's River Trail probably crossed the river 50 times as it went along its 17-mile-plus journey, and with the colder temperatures of late fall settling in, it was harder for the trail to stay dry. We moved deeper into the trail and started to look for a place to make camp. This is where Ryan and I made our first mistake. You see, Ryan and I have this rule. We don't camp near people if at all possible. Call us paranoid, but the last thing we want is for someone to drag us out of our tents and into the woods never to be seen again. So we always camped a pretty decent ways off of the trail and in the area that wasn't popular with overnight camping. Roughly 2.5 hours or so, we found what we thought was the perfect place to set up for the 2 nights that we would be out. We came up to Horseshoe Bend and ventured about half a mile off the trail into a clearing and set up. We built a teepee fire lay for that night and pitched our tents on either side. After setting up and unloading, we decided to walk back to the trail and go exploring around some of many swimming holes Jack's River had to offer. This was during Thanksgiving break, and I remember being surprised at how few people were on the trail. Maybe it was the weather or the fact that this was early in the week, but there didn't seem to be anyone hiking, much less staying the night. Around 5 o'clock, Ryan and I headed back to camp to start our fire, make dinner, and settle in for the night. As soon as the sun began to set, the cold rushed in. We added more wood to the fire, sat close, and just enjoyed conversation. Ryan was 2 years behind me in school. I was a senior, and he was a sophomore, but growing up we had always been close. We always hung out in the same groups, played the same sports, had the same hobbies, etc. Around 9, we were settled comfortably around the fire. I had just texted our mom to let her know we were safe and getting ready for bed, and I remember we were talking about dreading going to our grandparents' house for Thanksgiving and having the same awkward conversations we had each year with family we only saw on holidays when things started to get strange. We were no stranger to sounds in the woods, and these woods were full of animals, from deer to black bears, and even the random wild boar. If you were in the woods enough, you learned to distinguish certain sounds, and what we were hearing I can only chalk up to as odd. What Ryan and I heard was what sounded like someone sneaking around slowly just out of eyesight. With an animal walking on 4 legs, you hear a tighter group of steps, but what we were hearing sound very distinct to what a human sounds like when walking slowly or trying to move without making much sound. I remember we both pulled out our flashlights and shone it in the direction we felt the sounds were coming from, but that is what was so weird. Whenever we would fix our lights on a spot, we thought the sound were coming from the location of the sound would suddenly change. It was as if there were multiple people walking around us. That's when the whistling started. At first I thought it was the wind, and I remember thinking maybe the wind is just throwing leaves around, and what we are hearing is nothing but the wilderness around us. Ryan looked at me and asked if I was hearing that. I didn't answer and was trying to focus hard on each individual sound. 2 consecutive notes with roughly a 3 to 4 second gap, and then 2 more consecutive notes. Over and over again. Ryan kept asking if I heard that, and I put my finger to my lips trying to keep him from talking. The fear I felt was incredible. My jaw was tight, my fist clenched, knowing I wasn't ready for whatever was out there if it was anything at all. The whistling continued for what felt like forever, but thinking it through was maybe 5 minutes when Ryan finally yelled out into the darkness, "Hey! Quiet!" The whistling stopped. The crunching of the woods stopped. Nothing. I was pissed. I looked at Ryan with a, "What the hell?" look, and he shrugged his shoulders. "I had to do something," he said. I just shook my head. We sat there in silence for a few minutes when the woods erupted with noise. Something or someone was running in a circle around our campsite. The whistling came back. 2 consecutive notes with the same 3 to 4 second gap, and then 2 more consecutive notes. How could someone whistle this loudly without cracking while also running? I was done. I stood up, shining my flashlight in all directions, trying to catch a glimpse of whatever was screwing with us. Nothing. It felt close enough to touch, but we never saw a thing. That's when the movement stopped, but the whistling was still constant. It was so loud. Inhumanly loud. I looked at Ryan and told him to call the police. Now this is the part one will never forget. The part one never liked to talk about. While Ryan was on the phone with the dispatcher and telling them our location and what was going on, I stepped around the fire towards my tent. Inside my bag I had a 6-inch fixed blade that I always carried and thought I would feel a bit more comfortable with it in my hand more than just my flashlight. Yes, I went to unzip my tent. Trying to keep my eyes toward the woods, I heard some movement directly in front of me. I swept my light up in front of me, and for maybe 2 seconds I saw it. Whatever this person or thing was, it was about 5 feet up in a tree. Everything about it was long. Its arms, legs, neck, fingers, everything. And it was fast. As soon as the light hit it, launched backwards off of the tree. I heard it land, but it either jumped an impossible distance or landed in a thicket, because I heard it but never saw. I don't think I have ever yelled so loud. I ran back to where Ryan was and sat down. He kept asking me what I saw, but I couldn't answer. I just kept thinking about what I saw. Maybe 10 minutes later, we saw a couple of flashlight beams coming through the woods, and about 3 guys came into view, asking if everything was okay. I settled a bit and started asking them if they had seen or heard anything. All they said was they heard a lot of movement and then heard my scream, and that's when they headed in our direction. I tried to explain what had happened without sounding crazy, but it didn't seem to work. One of the guys walked around a bit and came back and said he didn't see anything. Ryan told them that we called the police, and roughly 30 minutes later, a park ranger showed up. Ryan and I tried explaining everything to him, but he just chalked it up to either a curious animal or some campers trying to mess with us. Either way, Ryan and I decided we weren't staying the night. We packed our stuff up and walked out of the woods with the ranger. He took our statement and we got in our car and drove home. Ryan and I don't talk about what happened that night, but neither of us have been back to Jack's River Trail and will probably never go back. 6th story. Why I stay away from national parks. We had been driving through the forest for about 20 minutes when my daughter started acting strange. Kylie was ordinarily a loud, active toddler with so much energy that my wife and I usually had to drag ourselves along behind her. Yet now, in the shadow of the huge evergreens, she had fallen silent. "Everything okay back there?" I asked. No response. "You excited about visiting the park, honey? We might even see a bear." I tried again. Still nothing. Kylie was staring with absolute concentration at the shadows beneath the trees. "Kylie? Honey?" My wife, Heather, reached back and shook Kylie's knee. "There's a man in the woods," Kylie said simply. "Of course there is, honey. It's a national park." I laughed, but Kylie just scowled and looked back out the window. I sighed. The sun was just starting to cast its golden beams through the misty woods, and if Kylie was in one of her moods, we had a very long day ahead of us. I spotted a gravel turnoff up ahead, and it occurred to me that maybe Kylie was just grumpy from the long car ride. My wife and I were plenty sore ourselves, and the prospect of dipping our feet in a cool mountain stream was too good to miss. I pulled in beside a dusty pickup truck and flashed a mischievous grin at Heather. We were both out the door as soon as the wheels stopped rolling. Kylie, however, refused to budge. "This is a bad place. I don't wanna." My daughter crossed her arms. There was no reasoning with her when she was like this. I nodded to my wife, and we each grabbed an arm to lift her out of the car seat. Kylie wailed and clawed, putting up such a fight that I was grateful that I'd trimmed her nails in the hotel room the night before. I looked over my shoulder at the pickup and winced. If the driver was around, he'd probably think that Kylie was being kidnapped. "There's a creek down there with big rocks and fish and waterfalls," I cooed. "You're gonna love it, Kentucky." Suddenly, my daughter stopped crying, but it didn't have anything to do with my pep talk. "Okay, Daddy, let's go." Her arms had gone slack, her face blank. I'd only ever seen her like this once before, when our plane had hit a gut-dropping patch of turbulence. The kind that makes passengers wail, luggage fall, and lights flicker. Then as now, she just shut down, too frightened to function. I couldn't imagine what was scaring her so badly. Apart from the rustling leaves and the murmur of the stream down below, the early morning forest was still. I slipped a neon pink jacket over Kylie's head before lifting her onto my shoulders and starting down the steep, muddy trail. Heather let out a loud whoop and sprinted past me. I winced. It felt wrong to disturb the silence. I thought and then wondered if Kylie's irrational fear had infected me as well. We found Heather lying on a smooth white stone beside the water, kicking her feet in the rapids. "It's so peaceful here," she smiled, and I had to agree. Even Kylie seemed to be doing better. She sat at the edge of the rock, absent-mindedly tugging at clumps of moss. "You're pretty quiet, champ." Heather rustled our daughter's hair. I'm listening to the man in the woods, Kylie replied, with that same flat voice. A shiver ran up my spine. Most toddlers say creepy things from time to time, but Kylie had never gone this deep into her daydreams before. What man in the woods? Honey, nobody's talking. Yes, he is. I can hear him. He's talking inside my head. Heather and I exchanged a glance. What's the man saying, champ? Heather asked. Kylie just frowned and pulled away, as if to say that whatever it was none of our business. The morning air suddenly seemed just a little bit cooler. A bird took off from a branch above us, and Heather and I both jumped, but not Kylie. Our daughter was staring dead ahead at something on the other side of the creek. Before either of us could stop her, she got on all fours and scurried across the smooth river rocks. It's amazing how fast small children can move when they really want to. By the time we got to our feet, Kylie was halfway across the creek. Not being a barefoot toddler myself, I slipped almost instantly, plunging into the freezing, waist-deep water. My daughter, meanwhile, had already reached the far bank. I felt a sudden, horrible certainty that if she climbed up it, we would never see her again. Fortunately, my wife was a lot less clumsy than I was. Jumping from rock to rock, she managed to grab the back of Kylie's pink jacket seconds before she disappeared into the ferns. Ordinarily, Kylie screamed her head off whenever we stopped her from doing what she wanted. But now, she was calm. In fact, she was giggling. Hee hee, Daddy got wet. Kylie, it is not okay to run off like that. What's gotten into you? My wife demanded. He said it would be funny, our daughter replied, with an all-too-adult sneer in her eyes. And he was right. Only then did it occur to me to climb the eroded bank and see what had made Kylie so eager to cross the stream. My fingers sank into the mud as I pulled myself upward, then fell back with a yelp as sharp teeth sank into my ankle. Kylie, Heather yelled. My daughter had bitten me. He doesn't like it when you look. Kylie hissed. That's enough. I grunted and picked my daughter up. She went into full tantrum mode, battering me with her tiny fists, but I was finally able to peer over the muddy creek bank. I saw only more trees, rotting logs, and a carpet of decaying leaves. Whatever Kylie had been so eager to get to, it was long gone. It was the worst fit Kylie had thrown in years, maybe ever. Getting a flailing, screaming, biting child back across the slippery rocks was no easy feat. By the end of it, all three of us were soaked and exhausted. I reached out for the car door and patted my hip for my keys. They weren't there. Had their clip come undone when I'd fallen in the water? Or had Kylie pulled them off on purpose? I didn't like to think about what that might mean. The keys. I groaned. I have to go back. Heather looked up at me from where she was struggling with Kylie. Her eyes begged me not to go. I understood how she felt. The day had suddenly turned strange and wrong, and all I wanted to do now was get back in the car with my family, drive out of the forest, and forget that any of it had ever happened. I glanced over at the pickup truck beside us. It was covered with dust and dead leaves, as though it had been sitting there abandoned for years. And what had happened to the driver? Something seemed to slither beneath the grimy blue tarp in the truck bed. I shuddered and turned back to my family. Kylie had finally calmed down. She sat in the gravel, messy hair hanging over her face, not saying a word. Babe, please. My wife whispered. Why don't we just go back to the road? We can flag someone down, ask them to call for help. Images flashed through my head. Long hungry hours, waiting for some smug tow truck driver. Yet another bill for my already bloated credit card. Kylie crying non-stop, our vacation ruined. No, I couldn't let that happen. All I had to do was walk back down the trail and grab my keys. So why did that suddenly feel so hard to do? I took a last look around. The winding two-lane road should have been packed, but not a single car had passed by. I could feel my wife's eyes on the back of my neck, pleading with me. Stay, they seemed to say. I'm scared. As much as I wanted to, someone had to get us out of the woods. Shivering in my waterlogged jeans, I stuffed my hands into my pockets and trudged back down the trail. I found myself wishing that somebody else would appear, just to confirm that we were still inside the borders of the national park at all. A grimy backpacker, an old fisherman on his way to the creek, anybody other than Kylie's man in the woods. Although I kept my eyes down in search of the keys, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd look up and find him just in front of me, looking like the Green Knight from some childhood storybook. A mossy beard, a crown of antlers, golden animal eyes. A footstep crunched in the leaves to my left. Glancing up, I saw an enormous stag making its way through the trees. There was something unsettling about the way it moved. It didn't look my way, didn't freeze when it saw me. It just kept walking straight ahead, like it was being guided by some terrible purpose. It was heading for the car. I jogged back up the slick path. The stag had reached the edge of the forest. Heather, oblivious, was squatting in the gravel, trying to talk to Kylie. My daughter sat with eerie patience, staring straight ahead, like she knew the stag was coming. From my vantage point, I could see how it walked out from the tree line and knelt down in front of her, as though inviting her to ride it. I could hear my wife and daughter arguing. Honey, get back. That's a wild animal. You don't know what it might do. The man in the woods says I should go with it, Mommy. He says where I'm going, there's lots of other kids just like me. Heather had heard enough. She grabbed for Kylie's arm, but the stag came between them. Snorting and frothing at the mouth, it reared back and rammed its head into my wife's chest. Heather flew backwards, impacting against the driver's side mirror with a sickening crack. She crumpled to the ground and lay still. Kylie, meanwhile, was already climbing onto the stag's back. No! I screamed. Kylie, wait. But the big animal was already moving. My daughter clung to the mangy fur of its neck. Her golden hair flashed in a beam of sunlight. Then she and the stag were gone, swallowed by the shadows of the forest. I ran to my wife. Heather was hurt, but breathing. I was trying desperately to remember my Cub Scout first aid when I heard tires crunching on the gravel. It was an ancient Park Service vehicle, and the woman behind the wheel looked just as grizzled as the car itself. She couldn't have been older than 30, but her sharp green eyes missed nothing. Everything all right here, sir? The ranger asked. Her hand was on the pistol at her hip as she stepped out of the vehicle. My wife, she was attacked by a deer. I stammered. And my daughter, she's missing. Let me see your hands. I did as I was told. I realized that she was looking for blood or bruising on my knuckles, signs that I had been the one to slam my wife against the side of the car. Okay, she grunted. Step back. She bent down to inspect Heather. My wife let out a gasp as the ranger pressed on her right side. Ribs broken. The ranger grunted. Should probably get her a doctor. Now what's this I hear about a missing daughter? I launched into my story. Leaving out the harder-to-believe elements made sense at the time. I told the ranger that Kylie had simply run off into the woods after a deer. Only later would I realize what a terrible mistake I had made. Time's a-wasting, then. The ranger grunted. Most lost kids are found within a couple hours. The ones who aren't, she trailed off, bent low over some knobs and buttons in her cruiser, then returned with a frown. We always get bad reception out here, ma'am. Are you going to be all right to rest in the back seat of the cruiser while we look for your little girl? My wife winced, but nodded. The old-fashioned pack that the ranger extracted from her trunk looked bigger than she was, but she hitched it onto her back with ease. Her uniform, too, wasn't quite what I was used to, but the Forest Service brown color was familiar enough. "Well," she asked, "you coming or not?" In between shouts of Kylie's name, the ranger introduced herself as Maddie Corvin. "We'll do a quick search of the area, but after that I'm going in for backup," Ranger Corvin said. "Keep the cruiser in sight at all times. You might think you know where the road is, but trust me, it's easy to get turned around out here." I could see what she meant. No matter which way I was facing, the carpet of ferns and dead leaves looked the same. Enormous tree trunks rose up from it like columns in some ancient temple. Then I glimpsed something that made my breath catch in my throat. A hot pink jacket. Ranger Corvin was yelling after me, but I only had thoughts for that sad little jacket laying in the mud. I ran to it, flipped it over. A pale, lifeless face stared up at me. Its eyes were hollow pits, its mouth a crimson smile sliced from ear to ear. A strangled cry escaped my lips. It took me a long moment to realize that I was looking at some sort of doll. Its head was made of an empty hornet's nest, its grin painted on with what looked like berry juice. Who would make something like this? A bony hand squeezed my shoulder, and I jumped. Maddie Corvin glared down at me. "I warned you not to run off on your own," she spat. I didn't understand why she was so angry until I looked around. I could no longer see the parking lot or the trail. I had no clue how to get back, and from the expression on Ranger Corvin's face, neither did she. She took out a compass, and we both waited while its needle spun, and spun, and spun. Ranger Corvin took a deep breath, the kind you take when you're trying to get your fear under control. She replaced the compass on the side of her pack, extracted some reflective tape from a side pocket, then wrapped a strip of it around a nearby tree. "Looks like old Higgs wasn't completely full of shit after all," she muttered. "Huh?" I asked. "Bert Higgs, my predecessor. He used to say that all sorts of strange stuff happened on this side of the park." "What did he say?" "Dunno. Never paid him much attention. I always figured he was just messing with me, 'cause he didn't like women in the service. I joined up in '73, and he retired 2 years later." My heart skipped a beat. There was no way that the 30-something woman in front of me had joined the park service in 1973. The unusual uniform, the old-fashioned cruiser and bulky backpack. It was all starting to make sense. What year do you think it is?" "It's 1975. Maddie Corvin stared at me like I was crazy. "Why? What year do you think it is?" Before I could answer, a snapping twig made us both spin. The stag. I had always considered deer to be harmless, innocent animals. I cried when Bambi's mom died, and hunting had always made me queasy. But there was nothing harmless or innocent about the beast that was staring us down. Foam frothed on its black lips, and its eyes glowed with a hateful, alien light. It stomped at the ground, and that's when I realized it was getting ready to charge. "Look-o you!" Maddie started to yell, but I was already running. The primitive, monkey part of my brain wanted to scramble up a tree, but the branches were too high, and meanwhile, the stag's hoofbeats were closing in. A brown blur passed beside me, Maddie Corvin. She was making for a narrow gap between two of the mossy boulders up ahead. She dived into the narrow, jagged space, and I threw myself in after her. Seconds later, antlers cracked against the rock behind me, then again and again. Ranger Corvin and I had backed as deep into the crevasse as we could. The stag's antlers were too wide for it to pass, but it still gnashed at us with its square herbivore teeth, like it was trying to eat us alive. Blood poured down its forehead, but it kept battering its body against the stone until it finally crumpled to the ground and lay still. Maddie and I looked at each other. She approached and opened one of its tightly closed eyelids with 2 fingers. The eerie light was gone from its eyes. The stag was dead. I asked Maddie if this was normal behavior for the deer around here. She looked at me like she wanted to skewer me on the stag's antlers herself. I could see why she was so frustrated. In our haste to flee the stag, we had completely lost sight of the tape-marked tree. Or so I thought. Even though Maddie had only marked 1 tree, behind us were 6 of them, each indicating that we had come from a different direction. What the hell was going on here? Okay, so the tape isn't going to work, Maddie said numbly. What about the rocks? These boulders had to roll down from someplace. We can follow them uphill until we're high enough to see the road. I squeezed the pink jacket in my hand. Kylie loved exploring, loved looking over the edge of high places. Would she also think to follow the big stones uphill? It was slow going. There was no path through the sea of ferns and enormous trees, no indication of direction apart from the trail of boulders. No birds sang, no squirrels leapt from branch to branch. The quiet made me paranoid. I kept looking over my shoulder when I really should have been paying more attention to what was in front of me. I was about to take another step when I felt a weight on my shoe. Something cold and heavy slithered across my foot. I heard a rattle. No, a lot of rattles. The ferns around us were rustling, but not because of any breeze. Maddie Corvin froze. We made eye contact and she reached, slowly, for the nearest boulder. I copied her. The feel of the rough stone was reassuring, but would I be able to scramble up it in time? No quick movements, I warned myself. Do not panic. No matter what happens, do not panic. With a shout and a kick, Maddie Corvin sprung onto the rock. Something long and writhing snapped at her as it fell from her leg. She was clinging to the rock by her toes and fingernails, but she had made it. Meanwhile, the rattling around me intensified. My blood turned to ice as the thing on my foot began to coil its way up my bare leg. Its scales were cold against my skin. The tongue of a second snake flickered against my ankle. Maddie, I whispered. Get going. Find Kylie. The look in Ranger Corvin's eyes as she looked back at me told me I was a dead man. But she understood that Kylie was my priority. She scrambled up the boulder and out of sight. The serpent coiled around my thigh, squeezed tighter. I held my breath, waiting for its bite, but it never came. The snake wrapped around my ankle hissed up at it. With a hiss of its own, it slithered down my other pant leg and out the cuff of my jeans. It was now or never. I very slowly lifted my boot and planted it on the rock. I would only get one chance at this, and if I fell, I was a dead man. Fangs shot out of the ferns and buried themselves in the sole of my shoe. It was all the motivation I needed. I threw myself against the rock face and clawed my way to the top of the boulder. The ground below looked deceptively peaceful from up here, and Ranger Corvin was nowhere to be found. I climbed from stone to stone until the slope of the land grew steeper. Up ahead, a jagged black cave opened in the cliff face like a hungry, toothless mouth. Several objects hung from the branches around it. More of those creepy dolls. The gruesome style was the same as before, but the clothes they were wearing were different. Where I'm going, there are lots of kids like me, Kylie had said. Did each one of those figurines represent a kidnapped child? I shivered. The breeze from the cave was musty and cold. Whatever was causing the strangeness in this part of the park clearly emanated from here. The dolls were proof enough of that. Did I really think I stood a chance against something that could vanish at will, control the minds of animals, and send a horde of snakes slithering down the side of a mountain? It didn't matter. My daughter's life was at stake. So much had changed after Kyle was born, and one of the things I left behind was my cigarette habit. I used to smoke about a pack a day, but during my wife's pregnancy I cut it back to 0. Even so, I never stopped carrying lighter in my pocket. I couldn't have said why. Maybe I imagined having one last toke in my final moments, like some 80s movie action hero. Instead, that frail piece of plastic was about to be my only source of light as I entered the cave ahead. The sloping stone ceiling grew lower and lower as I walked. I've always been claustrophobic, and soon I was afraid I would have to crawl in the dirt alongside the hand-sized cave spiders. But the path never grew so narrow. In fact, I couldn't shake the feeling that something just a little bit taller than me had been moving through here for so long that the tunnels had accommodated to its shape. Before long, the daylight and fluttering insects of the surface world were gone. There was nothing but me and my lighter, and I had no idea how much juice it had left. At any moment it might burn out, leaving me in total darkness. The flame reflected off of something up ahead. Dark and rainbow patterns shifted on its surface, reminding me of oily water, but the stuff was too thick for that. Glistening strands of it hung, mucus-like, from the ceiling. A tiny figure stood at the edge of the weird pool, looking doubtfully into it. Careless of whatever dangers might have been lurking in the shadows, I threw open my arms and ran to her. "Kylie." "Hi, Daddy." My daughter smiled. She didn't seem hurt, not physically at least. I asked her what she was doing here. "The man in the woods says I should go for a swim. He says if I do, I'll be able to fly and talk to animals just like him."
What?
I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "How?" "I dunno. Why don't you ask him yourself? He's standing right behind you." At that moment, the flame of my lighter went out. I hugged Kylie to my chest and fled back the way I'd come, I hoped. My foot slipped on a loose rock, and I crashed headfirst into something that was cold, slimy, and taller than me. There was an awful, inhuman chittering noise. 6 long fingers grazed my hair as they grabbed for my head. Kylie screamed. I dragged us forward along the cave floor, ignoring the spiders skittering through my hair and down the back of my shirt. The man in the woods, whatever it was, strode slowly behind us, taking its time. Enjoying this. There was a light up ahead, but that didn't make sense. Even if we had made it further than I thought, we still shouldn't have been anywhere near the cave entrance. The light bobbed closer, shone on our faces. It was a flashlight. Its beam flickered up to the thing hovering over us. "Stay down and keep moving," Maddie Corvin shouted. The boom of her echoed deafeningly from the cave walls, but in the glow of her flashlight, the path to the exit was clear. There was movement behind us, a lot of movement, as though dozens of child-sized things were scurrying across the cobwebbed ceiling. Maddie kept firing, and Kylie and I kept running. I set my daughter down as soon as we were free of the cavern. To my surprise, I could see the creek and even the cars from where we stood, less than half a mile away. It was as though whatever disorienting power permeated the place had faded, at least for now. Moments later, Ranger Corvin backed out of the cave, her pistol still aimed into the gloom. "Did you get it?" I whispered. "I don't know," Maddie answered truthfully, "but I'm not budging from this spot until I'm sure you folks are safe. Get back to your wife and get out of here." With Kylie on my shoulders, I staggered back through the ferns. My eyes swept the ground for snakes, but like the 6 tape-marked trees and creepy dolls, the rattlers were suddenly nowhere to be found. At the edge of the creek, I spotted something shiny lying in the mud. My car keys. Heather sat up in the back of Ranger Corvin's cruiser as we approached. "You're back so soon," she called out. "How on earth did you find Kylie so fast?" From Heather's perspective, I had been gone only a few minutes. For me and Ranger Corvin, however, it felt like half a day had passed. I wondered what Maddie would find when, and if, she made it out of the woods. My wife's eyes grew wide as she heard 3 gunshots from the ridge above. There was something desperate about the sound that spurred me into action. Ranger Corvin needed help, and we were the only ones who could get it for her. "I told you this was a bad place," Kylie sniffled, wiping at the cave dirt on her face. Heather clipped her into her car seat as I pulled out of the gravel turnoff and raced back down the two-lane road to a small gas station that I had spotted near the entrance of the park. Leaving the engine running, I dashed inside. A dusty bell jingled above the door. The place was a 4-pump store that sold overpriced drinks and firewood to tourists, while locals stopped in for bait and coffee. The woman behind the counter dropped a pot of it when she saw me come running in. For Maddie Corvin, almost 50 years had passed, but she recognized me right away. Her Forest Service uniform had been replaced with a yellow gas station polo shirt, and her hair had gone gray, but her bright green eyes had lost none of their sharpness. I had no doubt that the woman at the cash register was the same person who had saved my daughter and I from certain death only hours before. "You," she grunted, in a voice roughened by years of booze and cigarettes. "I always wondered if you would ever come walking through that door. After what happened, it's the only reason I stuck around here." When Maddie had emerged from the woods back in 1975, raving about missing children and missing time, there had been no proof to back up her claims. My family and I were nowhere to be found, and she wasn't able to locate the cave or the grotesque dolls again. The Park Service let her go less than a month later, citing mental health concerns. She had worked here at the gas station ever since, listening to the tales the locals told about odd animal behavior and unexplained sightings at the gravel turnoff by the creek. I warn the tourists about the place. I tell him that there's a dangerous bear in the area. It's easier than the truth, and who knows, maybe some of them listen. Out in the car, Kylie was getting antsy, squirming and kicking in her car seat. She'd been through so much. I made a point to grab a few of her favorite snacks from the gas station shelves, but when I went to pay, Maddie waved me away. "It's on the house," the ex-ranger smirked. "I don't know how to thank you." "Forget about it. It's ancient history. You really want to thank me? Spread the word. Let people know that if they notice kids or animals acting strange in the woods, it might be the only warning they get." I promised that I would. She waved as we pulled out of the parking lot, standing just as tall and strong as she had been in the moment we met. I hoped that whatever was lurking among the tall trees behind the gas station would allow her to live out the rest of her days in peace. I hoped, too, that I wasn't taking a part of it out of the park with me. Kylie was munching contentedly on a chocolate donut in the back seat, but when I glanced at her in the rearview mirror, her bright green eyes flashed up to meet my own. "Keep driving, Daddy," her voice said inside my head. "Keep driving, and act like you don't know." 7th story. A blank-faced man with antlers. When I was dating this girl back in high school, we had similar dreams on the same night. I had just come home from her house, about an hour drive apart, and had fallen asleep. I had a terrible dream that night about a blank-faced man in a black coat with no face and antlers. To start off, I don't have many nightmares that I remember or dream about. This one has stuck with me for about 4 years now, though. The dream was about me driving home, my now ex-girlfriend at the time sitting in the passenger seat. We had pulled up on a truck. The thing was that the truck was exactly like mine. An old white single-can short bed 97 Chevy Cheyenne. I got out to investigate the truck, but when I did, it started rolling away. I looked behind me to see that my initial truck has disappeared, and in its spot stood this creature. It was standing there. I took off after my truck, which was still rolling, except now my clothes that I had from my closet at my house were scattered on the road. He kept saying to me, "Hat, hat, hat," as if he wanted the hat on my head. Now I wore caps all the time. I was basically never seen without one. But he was calling out to me and wanted the hat off my head. Eventually, I caught up to my truck with the entity or creature still the same length away, still calling out to me. When I opened the door to my truck, I was taken to a cluttered room, as if being spawned into another dimension. It was like a maze of just junk, and directly behind me was the no-faced, black coat, antlered creature. It reached for me, wanting, this time screeching and yelling that it wanted my hat. I ran through this maze for what felt like hours on end with the thing directly behind me. I reached a door after running through this place, only to hear crying on the other side. The crying was of my girlfriend at the time, little cousin. I heard the similar crying that very night before I headed home from her house, simply because she didn't want to go to bed. As all little kids cry about, she was crying for my girlfriend's name. Just crying out, "Jacqueline, Jacqueline," and for no other reason. Without thinking, I opened the door, just as this thing started reaching out for me with a misty, almost smoky-colored hand, and that was it. I woke up with cold sweats, and instantly called my girlfriend at the time. This is where it gets weird. She had just had a nightmare too about the same exact creature. Expect hers was just about getting to her little cousin. The whole time she was on one side of the door, beating at it, scratching at it, as her cousin was yelling at her to help her because there was this man on the other side of the door. She opened the door after what she said felt like hours of beating at the entrance, and he was standing there with her cousin, like his black smoky hands wrapped around her face. The only word he said to her was hat. When I called her, she was crying and telling me she thought her cousin had been taken, and she kept seeing this creature-like man with no face and antlers. Before I even got a word out, I explained to her what my nightmare was about. Basically just being pursued by this man. We both agreed to never talk about it again, then eventually broke up about a month later due to distance issues and high school drama. I just don't know what happened that night. I don't know why we dreamed the same person wanting the same thing. Has there ever been similar instances of a no-faced man with deer antlers appearing in your dreams? If I can reconnect with her about this, I will, but it's been 5 years. I'll try to answer any questions y'all have. It sounds stupid, and it really, really is. Why would this thing want a hat, and why would he chase us through nightmares? There was no special connection with me and her cousin, and any old hat can't have some kind of connection like that. Why the hell was I chased over a hat?